Om Apyayendu Mama Angani Vak Pranaschakshrusrotramadho Balamindriyani Cha Sarvani Sarvam Brahma Upanishadam Maham Brahma Nirakuryam Mama Brahma Nirakarut Aniragaranamastva Nirakaranam Mestu Tadatmani Niradhiya Upanishatsu Dharmaste Mayi Santu Te Mayi Santu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May my limbs, speech, vital force, eyes, ears, as also strength and all the organs and all the powers and faculties that the Almighty God has given to me become well developed in service of the Lord. Everything is Brahman, revealed in the Upanishads as the omnipresent reality pervading everywhere. May I not deny the absolute reality, and may the Brahman, the absolute reality, not deny me. Let there be perfect peace and happiness everywhere. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So today's topic is Sri Krishna. Most of you know Sri Krishna and his teachings as the teacher who gave us the universal message of Bhagavad Gita. That's how Krishna is mostly known all over the world. In fact, the Vedanta Society of San Francisco was formed by Swami Vivekananda, who came to this country in 1893. And he made a very memorable, well-known speech on September 11, 1893. It's known as the well-known Chicago Address, considered to be one of the greatest speeches of all times. Now, in that speech, he gives an English translation of a great idea which was given to this world by Sri Krishna. Ye yatham mam prapadyante tam tathaiva bhajamyaham mama varma anuvartanti manushyaha partha sarvasyaha. This is the verse, Sanskrit verse, which Swamiji translated into a highly intelligent, fluid English. And he gives an elaborate interpretation of the essence of this verse. The literal translation is something like this. Anybody in this world who is sincere, honest, truthful, and unselfish, and tries to reach the sublime spiritual truth, meditating, worshipping, prayer, or by any means that he prefers to practice. Anybody in the world, with whatever religion, whatever culture, whatever tradition he or she may belong to, or she or he may not belong to any tradition whatsoever. He could be an atheist, an agnostic, or a conventional believer in God. But if that person is sincere, honest, and truthful, and unselfish and pure-hearted, that person is taking the road that will ultimately reach me. That is the essence of the teaching. Manushya Partha Sarvasya, whatever may be the means. People sometimes pray, sometimes they read books and intellectually try to analyze the supreme spiritual truth. Sometimes they practice psychic control. There are many great humanists who would tell you they do not believe in any kind of conventional organized religions, but still they are unselfish, they are pure-hearted, their mind is pure, they are sincere and honest. All these people, whatsoever may be their cultural tradition, religious faith, they will reach me. Now, this is the central theme of Swami Vivekananda's famous speech, Chicago speech. In fact, he doesn't quote this verse, but the first and perhaps the most important speech that Vivekananda made in his whole life was nothing but an interpretation of this sublime spiritual truth, this universal spiritual philosophy which came from Sri Krishna. That's how we can relate our own times to Sri Krishna's age. And this message which Vivekananda gave, which as I said is an interpretation, is a commentary on the central theme of Sri Krishna's life and message, forms the foundation of modern concepts of interfaith harmony, interreligious dialogue, the idea that we may all belong to different religious traditions, or many of us may not have any religion at all. Still, we can all live together in this world in perfect harmony and peace. This idea which Vivekananda gave to the world comes from Sri Krishna. That's how we have to relate the relevance of Sri Krishna's times and age and this philosophy to our own times. Now, I would say something about Sri Krishna as a spiritual teacher. Most of the modern historians believe that the central teachings of Lord Krishna were given to this world around 3326 BC. This is the time which most historians believe. This was the period when this Mahabharata war took place, according to most of the modern historians. And it was during the Mahabharata period that Lord Krishna gave this message. So let us say he may have lived around, say, in the 3300 BC, around that time. Now, why do we still remember his teachings today? Why do we still remember his personality today? For that, I should tell you something about a peculiar spiritual mechanism which is a special feature of Hindu Vedantic heritage. In Vedantic heritage, there is a special spiritual mechanism which preserved the eternal universal teachings of Vedanta and Upanishads and Vedas through a succession of religious teachers. These teachers broadly belong to two categories, the Acharyas and Avataras. Avataras mean incarnation. Acharya means the great universal teacher. There was a succession of great teachers who practiced the eternal ancient teachings of the Vedas in their own life. and then gave a new interpretation to those central teachings to suit their own times. A kind of readjustment, a commentary, reinterpretation. Remember, if we do not reinterpret the great religious and spiritual scriptures of the world, there will be no peace in this world. Because every religious tradition, every spiritual tradition contains two aspects: the universal spiritual teachings and the secondary details, mostly tribalistic, cultural, sometimes socio-anthropological, racial, and geographical aspects. Every religious teacher and every great religious scripture has got these two aspects: the universal, eternal spiritual truths, which are relevant and which are applicable to the whole humanity of all times and all ages, all civilizations, which never change, which remain unchanged throughout history for millennia. And then there are some secondary details. Every prophet, every spiritual teacher brings with him the burden of his own times. The racial, the cultural conventions and customs, and the tribalistic aspects of the people among whom they are born. Now, if you interpret their universal spiritual teachings in the light of the tribalistic or cultural aspects, you are bringing down a universal philosophy to a tribalistic, localized convention or custom. Now, in India, what happened was, throughout history, in every age, there was a great teacher. And this teacher took from the past the central eternal teachings of the Vedas, practiced, and then reinterpreted according to the needs and demands of their times and handed over to the next generation. I shall just give you a few flashlights as to how this system worked. I quoted a very important message which Lord Krishna gave in the Gita, which Swami Vivekananda expounded in his Chicago address. How this mechanism worked in India's history. I can give an example. In the 4th century BC, there was a Jewish migration from the Middle East to India. That is the time when the Assyrians destroyed the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. There are two views. It may be 6th century BC, it could be 4th century BC. But there was certainly a very important episode. The temple was destroyed, and there was a migration of Jews from Middle East to India. And when they reached India, the extreme southwest part of Indian subcontinent, you know what the great kings and the people who followed this teaching of Gita, the teachings of Lord Krishna, you know how they welcomed them. They handed over to them villages, townships, money and wealth. And they handed over to them their temples and asked them, you convert these temples into your synagogues. Now again there was a migration, there were two migrations, the Christian migration under St. Thomas and Jewish migration again almost during the same time, 52 AD and 54 AD, two migrations. One, the first one was a migration under St. Thomas, was supposed to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, the doubting Thomas, well-known person. The other one was a Jewish migration. Both of them came and the same thing happened. Villages, townships and temples were handed over to them. And almost an identical episode took place in 7th century AD when the followers of Zoroastrian religion, Zoroaster, migrated to the west coast, today's Gujarat state. And the Hindu kings gave them villages. And they still continue to live in India. Some of the famous industrialists of India belong to that community. They came from Iran, Persia, as it was known in those days, in 7th century AD, mind you, running away when the entire Iran nation was being Islamized by the Arabs. I'm telling you, this is how Sri Krishna's message worked. A message of universalism. A message that teaches us, well, the whole humanity is one spiritual family. So, it is a kind of spiritual message that goes beyond religions, the conventional definitions of religion. So, in a way, Sri Krishna was not just a religious teacher. He was a spiritual teacher. He was the prophet of a great spiritual philosophy, universal spiritual humanism. This was the divine dimension of these spiritual personalities. As I said once at the beginning, every great prophet brings with him or with her the burden of his tribalistic, cultural, socio-anthropological background. But at the same time, the same prophet has a divine dimension. That's why we remember them today. We don't remember billions and billions of people who may have lived on this planet Earth for the last thousands of years. But they are remembered today because they had a divine dimension. Their teachings and their life and their philosophy of life had a divine dimension. Lord Krishna was no exception to this. As a human being, if you look upon him, he was a very interesting personality. He was a soldier, a diplomat, a philosopher, a king, and a kingmaker. And along with that, he was an extremely serene, normal person. The normal has to be underlined. I shall explain this point. If you look at Lord Sri Krishna's pictures, photos, you never find Krishna worried or in a doubting or in a conflict situation. He never doubted. He never hesitated. He never doubted. Sometimes this is a very interesting. That means it's a sign of normality or abnormality. A person who never doubts, who never hesitates. You can get a clue to this if you read the famous devotional classics known as Bhagavata Purana, which is nothing but a description of Lord Krishna's life and philosophy. There is a statement, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. This Bhagavan actually means incarnation of God, who has got 6 important characteristics: absolute knowledge, absolute power, absolute wealth, absolute renunciation, and energy, vitality. All these qualities in their superhuman dimension, when they converge in one single personality, that person could be called Bhagavan. Now, there is a statement, as I said, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. Krishna is God himself. There's a literal meaning, more or less. So, there is a description of why Krishna always smiled. He was never worried, he never wept, he never cried. Maybe he was the great spiritual teacher who never hesitated, never cried, and was never grief-stricken. The explanation is this. Why do we become worried? Why do we become anxious? And sometimes why do we become extremely excited, overjoyed? When we identify ourselves with the present moment, then only we become extremely anxious. Suppose something unfortunate, tragic takes place. We think that tragic situation will create a permanent, unpleasant, tragic problem in our life. So we look upon the present as the eternal. So we identify ourselves with that problem. So we lose our balance. We become extremely shocked. We become anxious. We become worried. Similarly, when we when we enjoy a pleasant, a happy situation, we become overjoyed. Then also we lose our balance on both occasions. Both extremes create the same effect, imbalance, because we identify ourselves with the present. And we think that happy situation is a permanent phenomenon, so we become overjoyed. But suppose when you face a problem, you also realize this problem is only a momentary phenomenon. This situation, the present will vanish, and the present tragic, unpleasant situation is momentary, it will vanish, and the happy situation will return. Then you will not become too anxious, worried. Because you are aware, you can look at the present and also the future. But this doesn't happen except to a few gifted philosophers. We mostly identify with the present. So we become either too worried or too much overjoyed. Now, Krishna could see the whole mystery of human life in a single dimension. He could see the past, present, and future as a single dimension. Therefore, he was never worried and he was never overjoyed. If there is a happy situation, the philosopher in Krishna told him, well, this happiness is not permanent. It is momentary. So there was no need to get overjoyed. If there is an unhappy situation, then also he will remember, well, this unhappiness is not eternal, it is momentary. So there is no need to be too much shocked or, grieved. This is the message of wisdom. This is the essence of wisdom. So Krishna could see the whole human life situation as a single dimension. The past, present, and future appeared to him simultaneously. Therefore, he was never worried, he never wept, he was never overjoyed. There was always the smile of an all-knowing, omniscient philosopher on his face. This is a very interesting description in the Bhagavata Purana. Krishna's central teachings and personality are graphically described in the two well-known classics. The one is Mahabharata, the other is Bhagavata Purana. Mahabharata is a huge classic, more than 100,000 verses, with hundreds of characters, where hundreds of dynasties, royal dynasties are explained. The whole, life period of civilizations spread over thousands of years are described. Semi-mythological and semi-historical. We don't know which part is pure history and we don't know which part is mythology. But remember, mythology plays a very important role in the preservation of values and culture. Without mythology, no culture can survive. Mythology is sometimes described as a greater and more accurate description of the reality of life around us. Because the imaginations, the imageries, all cannot take place in a vacuum. If you read a history book, it is not very different from reading a telephone directory. You cannot enjoy reading a telephone directory. But if you read classical literature like Mahabharata or all these books, their characters, kings, emperors, saints and sages and divine personalities and not so divine personalities also, the demons also come alive. So they preserve certain values and mythologies preserve these spiritual teachings in the minds of people around. So Mahabharata gives a very graphic description of Krishna, the philosopher, the diplomat, the king, the kingmaker, the devotee, the practitioner of karma yoga, and so on. Bhagavata Purana gives what we call a more divine, supernatural dimension of Krishna's personality. One of the most famous descriptions of the life and purpose and the mission of Lord Krishna the description was given by Shankaracharya, the commentator of Bhagavad Gita. I mentioned to you Bhagavad Gita, which contains the universal message of Lord Krishna. This Bhagavad Gita was practically unknown till 8th century AD. Though it is part of Mahabharata, which is very ancient, which may be at least 5,000 years old. But Mahabharata, though it contained Bhagavad Gita, because of its size and dimension, overshadowed the spiritual uniqueness of this comparatively short fraction of the classic, that is Bhagavad Gita, which has only 700 verses. Mahabharata has got more than 100,000 verses. Bhagavad Gita, only 700 verses. So Bhagavad Gita was practically not known as a great spiritual classic till 8th century AD. And Shankaracharya was born in 778 AD and passed away in 810, only about 32 years of life. He was the one who wrote a masterly commentary on the philosophical teachings of Bhagavad Gita. And if we are reading Bhagavad Gita today, it's because he brought out the spiritual message, the spiritual philosophy that is enshrined in this tiny fraction of Mahabharata. Shankaracharya gives a short description of the life philosophy and the mission of Krishna's life. I shall give a free translation and an expanded interpretation. But I shall read the text, Sanskrit text. It comes at the beginning of Shankara's commentary. Sa Bhagavan Sushtva idam jagat tasya sthitim chikishuku maricyadi nagre sushtva prajapadin pravritti lakshanam dharmam grahayamasa vedoktam tadha anyamsa sanaka sanandanadin utpadya nivritti lakshanam dharmam grahayamasa jnana vairagi lakshanam dividuhi vedokto dharmaha pravritti lakshano nivritti lakshanascha jagadasthidikaranam praninam sakshat abhyude nisaya sahetuhu yes sadharmo brahmanadyehi varnibhihi asramibhihi cha seyorthibhihi anushthiyamanaha dirghena kayena anushthadrunam kamodbhavad hiyamana viveka vijnana hetukena adharmena abhibhuyamane dharme pravurdhamane cha adharme jagadasthitim paripalayishuhu sadhikarta narayanakhyo vishnuhu bhaumasya brahmano brahmanatvasya rakshanartham devakyam vasudevat amsena krishna kila sambabhuva brahmanatvasya rakshanena rakshitasya vaitiko dharma tadadhinatvat varnasrama bhedanam sacha bhagavan jnana aishwarya balavirya tejobhi sada sampannaha trunatmikam vaishnavim swam maya mula pragadim vashikritya aja avyayo bhudanam isharo nitya shuddha buddha mukta svabhava api san sumaya dehavaniva jata ivacha lokanugraham kurvaniva lakshide. I read rather fast because I didn't mean to explain every word, but I shall give the essence. We know why I read this. It is supposed to be the most profound and the most philosophical exposition of the life, philosophy, and the mission of Sri Krishna. That's why I read this. Here Shankaracharya says, why Krishna was born? Now, he says, the entire human civilization can be interpreted in terms of two fundamental human tendencies. One tendency, active, dynamic, hyperactive rather. People with a strong ambition, enthusiasm, drive and push and organization skill, who want to make the best use of life in this world, make the best use of the gifts of nature by using science and technology. They're very active. Then there are a few people not so active. They are active, but active in a much more sublime sense. They are contemplative. Contemplation is not inferior to action. Sometimes we feel those who are always active are great just because they're active. And some people would very proudly tell you, well, I have a wonderful quality. I should be always active. I would say it's not a quality, it's a disease. In fact, to be able to withdraw from action is as much a gift as the gift to be active when action is necessary, in demand. So Shankaracharya says, in the entire human civilization, everywhere, in any nation, in any culture, everywhere, these are the two fundamental human drives, human tendencies. The hyperactive and the contemplative. The active nature enables you to live a happy life in this world, to make use of the nature and its resources. But the contemplative people, they stand aside from this instinctive flow and then ask the question, well, what's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of existence? You just think of a Socrates, a Demosthenes who went about with an open lamp, in broad daylight. Somebody asked him, what's the matter? I want to see a man. And he was walking in Athens, where people were walking in the streets. He couldn't see any human beings. Now, there are some such people who really preserve the eternal treasures of human culture and human civilization. Not that the active people are inferior, not at all. Because a spiritual philosophy doesn't have hands and legs. It cannot stand unless there are people who are willing to work to implement that philosophical idea. So, but Shankaracharya says these are the two fundamental human tendencies, the active and the contemplative. Now, sometimes what happens, in the midst of conflict between these two tendencies, there should be, really speaking, there is no conflict, but sometimes conflicts may arise. Sometimes what happens, the higher spiritual values, ethical values, moral values may take a back seat. The power, ambition, violence, and the ultra material values may become dominant. As a result, what happens? There will be a degradation of culture, a degradation of civilization. The higher ethos and values get lost. And in their place, the secular material values become predominant. Just imagine, I can give an example. In today's world, everywhere, suppose in an educational system, you do not give any importance to philosophy, religion, ethics or morality or humanities, at least philosophy or literature or history. And if you overemphasize, if you focus on science and technology alone, what will happen? Human beings may become morons, robots, or demons, monsters, or madmen. Because unless we can learn, we can think beyond the present, beyond the immediate utility of what we are learning, beyond the immediate material benefit, utility of what you call profit or money or whatever it is, there cannot be any higher culture. So it is a contemplative nature of the human civilization, of the human race, that preserves, that tells these people, the overactive people, look here, action is necessary, but action alone should not be the supreme goal of human aspirations. There is something beyond action. If action is devoid of wisdom, then action alone can take human civilization to a precipice, to a collapse. So, Shankaracharya says, sometimes in the evolution of human civilization and culture, there may be a degradation, a downfall of the higher values, higher human aspirations, ethical, moral, and spiritual aspirations, may take a backseat or may be pushed aside, may be neglected. And what happens? There's a downfall of the essence of human endeavor. So he says, under such circumstances, what happens? A great master mind emerges. It may be a Jesus Christ or Moses in the Palestine, in the Middle East. It could be Krishna or Shankaracharya, Ramakrishna Order in India. It could have been anybody. You find, if you look at the human history, whom do we remember? We remember those who were not active in the sense Napoleon was active, or maybe Henry Ford was active. We preserve, we revere in our hearts the memories of those who gave to human civilization something much deeper and much more profound. We respect others, of course. We respect the great industrialists, technologists, maybe great military generals, Hannibal, Julius Caesar, Marlborough, Napoleon, anybody. But then, much more than any of them, we remember a Buddha or a Jesus or a Moses or Shankaracharya, Ramakrishna Order, of these great spiritual teachers. Because when we face a problem in material life, we turn to Gita or the Bible. We don't read to Dale Carnegie's book, how to make, 7 fundamental principles of success. If you read that, for some time your mind may mind may get a little food, but that kind of food is just like buttermilk. After some time you may feel hungry again. But if you read a Bible or a Gita or any of the great universal spiritual teachings, which contain the teachings of these great spiritual masters who belong to the contemplative type, then we feel spiritually, intellectually enriched. Now, Shankaracharya says, under such circumstances, there is a downfall of culture due to the domination of the active type and complete disappearance of the contemplative type. Then what happens? A master mind emerges. This has happened in all civilizations, in all cultures, in most of the well-known nationalities. What they do? They bring from the past the eternal spiritual teachings and they give a reinterpretation. Now, according to Shankaracharya, Lord Krishna was born like that. The great master mind arose and he gave a new interpretation to these spiritual teachings. There is a famous verse in the spiritual classic, the Bhagavata Purana, which is very well known. That is, it says, who is the greatest devotee of God? It's a very interesting part in the 11th book. Who is the greatest devotee of God? There's a discussion between a king and 9 sages. Once 9 saints or sages happened to visit a great philosopher king. And the king, taking use of this opportunity, asked 9 questions, and each of the saints gave a reply. So one of the questions was, who is the real or the greatest, the ideal devotee of God? So in 3 verses, there is a description. Well, in a descending order, first, a great sage, his name is Antariksha, he gives the picture of the highest devotee. And then he described who is a devotee who has not reached the status of the highest devotee, but trying to reach there. And who is the beginner? Those who go to kindergarten of spiritual life. So I shall start with the kindergarten stage. So the sage says, there are people who go to temples, churches, places of worship, practice some rituals, mechanical rituals. But then they do not go beyond that. Such people are the beginners in spiritual life. Archayam eva hari pujam cha saddhiyehade nachat bhakteshu chanyeshu yakkarodi sa prakritaka means. So bhakta prakrita smrtaka. There are two versions are there. The meaning is this. Those who go to temples, those who perform rituals, those who perform ceremonies, those who read books, and just those who begin with ceremonies and end with ceremonies. Those who are ritualistic and ceremonial, mechanical in their spiritual life, not going beyond the mechanical ceremonies. They are not bad, but they are only beginners. And who is the highest? The highest one is a devotee who can see God outside the place of worship as well. In the temple or a church, and also outside the temple and church. When they think of God, they look upon the whole humanity as residing within God. When they look upon human beings, they believe that God is the immanent, the indweller in all living beings. This is the characteristic of the highest devotee. That is the description of the sage. So the highest spirituality is nothing but the highest and most sublime form of universal spiritual humanism. The highest devotee is one who can see the presence of God everywhere and who can see the whole human family in God. That means the thin barrier of secular and spiritual vanishes. And such a devotee is the highest devotee. Now, these are some of in fact, remember the verses that I called Sarva Bhuteshu Yapashyet Bhagavad Bhavam Atmanaha Bhudani Bhagavadi Atmani Esha Bhagavadottama. This is the famous verse which I explained just now. The highest devotee of God is one who can see the presence of God everywhere and who can see in God the whole existence, all humanity, all animal kingdom, everything in God. It is not pantheism or pantheism. It is the highest form of spiritual philosophy, where one can communicate with God without the medium of a book, a priest, or a place of worship, or certain rituals. If we open our heart, and if we become pure at heart, we can see the presence of the Lord within ourselves. All these teachings are coming from Lord Sri Krishna. These teachings which are interpreted with the help of an imagery or a parable, are all coming from Lord Krishna himself. So he says, Gudhatmanam Chalal Archaye Danamanabhyam Maitri Abhinnena Chakshusha. That Lord Krishna says, I reside in the hearts of all. I am not residing outside. I am present in all human beings. Therefore, every act of worship should be some kind of act of service. And every act of service also is a kind of worship. The worship and work are not different. So, another interesting characteristic of Lord Krishna, I say, time is catching up, but I just finish in a few moments. One of the most important characteristics of Lord Krishna is he was almost a spiritual revolutionary. Now, if you read the history of Vedantic tradition, you find Lord Krishna appeared at a time when Vedic tradition, Vedic heritage had been hijacked by ritualists. People who thought that there is nothing beyond external mechanical rituals and ceremonies. The essence of religion is nothing but a kind of intellectual and physical gymnastics, a different angle. You go to a place, you sit there, you read, and their spirituality begins and their spirituality ends. That's the beginning and end of religion. Lord Krishna gave a very revolutionary interpretation to the Upanishadic philosophy. That's why modern exponents of Vedanta like Swami Vivekananda says that Sri Krishna was the greatest commentator of Vedic tradition, Vedic culture. Today we talk about Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, means Raj Yoga, Jnana Yoga. The path of knowledge, the path of devotion, the path of action, and the path of psychic control. In fact, all these four divisions were first expounded by Lord Krishna. Karma Yoga, as it is understood today, did not exist before the advent of Lord Krishna. It existed as an idea, but it was expounded as a spiritual path for the first time in the history of Vedanta by Sri Krishna. Again, Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion. If you cannot, if you are of a devotional, if you are of a devotional temperament, you can pray, you can worship, you can perform rituals with great devotion. This is also a path. Or if you are a philosopher, you can just analyze the supreme reality, what's the ultimate reality behind this relative phenomenal empirical world. This is a path of a philosopher. Or if you can control your own mind, the path of Raj Yoga. All these ideas, for the first time, came from Lord Krishna, because it is Bhagavad Gita which for the first time systematically analyzed spiritual practices in the light of these four distinct paths. These ideas did exist. You find in the Mahabharata, elsewhere. In many other pre-Bhagavad Gita texts, you find these ideas mentioned, hinted at, but then as a distinct, as a complete, comprehensive spiritual path, all these ideas were expounded for the first time by Lord Krishna. That is, he was a great revolutionary. Again, most of the great ideas of the Upanishads that we normally talk about, write about, expound today are systematically analyzed and described by Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. And it also contains the essence of many other philosophical systems. So in Sri Krishna you find a great philosopher and a mystic and a spiritual teacher. And mind you, if you read the Mahabharata, you find him playing so many different roles. He was a great diplomat who tried to stop a war between two groups of a same dynasty, same royal family. He comes to the aid of women in distress. He fights with evil people and liberates the prisoners. Liberate the good people, spiritual seekers who are imprisoned by the demons. All these stories you find in Mahabharata. In the midst of all that, he was a man of supreme compassion and mercy. Krishna is sometimes called, you find some of the greatest synonyms used to describe Lord Krishna's character is more related to compassion, sympathy, human love. All these ideas are associated with Sri Krishna's personality and character. So, which in a rather short time, I have tried to give you a short picture of Sri Krishna's message and personality. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu.